On this episode of China Unscripted, China is becoming increasingly aggressive in its quest for domination of the South China Sea, and the Philippines is on the front lines. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Ganesha.
Joining us today is Jay Batongbacal. He's the director of the Institute for Maritime Affairs and the Law of the Sea and a professor at the University of the Philippines. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, happy to be here.
There's so much to talk about with China's aggressions against the Philippines. Let's start with the latest. So China just announced that they would detain any foreign nationals found trespassing in Chinese waters, which is basically any waters they claim, which is the entire South China Sea. Do you think they're actually going to do that?
Well, I certainly hope not. I don't think they will just go around and catch people. After all, the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea is just a vast expanse of waters. And even if they have just the largest ships and the fastest ones, there's just too many vessels out there, not just Chinese, but Filipinos and all other nationalities. So I don't think they'll be able to implement it the way that they're presenting it now. What it does do is give them some kind of allegedly legal basis in case they do decide to carry it out against a particular vessel or crew that they find somewhere there. So I think that's the real purpose there. It's just to give them that reserve reason or argument that they can use anytime.
So, we've seen Chinese Coast Guard vessels spraying Filipino fishing boats with water cannons. You don't think they would escalate that by then just, doing a performative stunt where this Filipino fisherman is in Chinese territorial waters and they just nab up the crew?
Yes, that is possible. It's like a demonstration, especially if there are going to be a lot of other Filipino vessels in the area. They've actually done similar things before, like ramming a Filipino vessel, for example. They've done it in Scarborough, and that scared the fishermen. And that's why fishermen now, whenever they see Chinese Coast Guard vessels or even their maritime militia vessels, they get nervous and they try to stay away. So that's how they were being eased out of the West Philippine Sea.
Yeah, I remember it was in 2016. We hitched a ride on a Filipino fishing boat to go to the Scarborough Shoal. And, they're the Chinese Coast Guard in the distance. But yeah, that boat had been sprayed with a water cannon.
No, they had been rammed.
Before. They were rammed.
They were rammed.
But the captain didn't tell us.
Yeah.
The captain didn't tell us until we were already out at sea. And then we're like, wow, I can't believe you're courageous enough to take us back
I couldn't
to
believe
this
we
area.
were stupid enough to go out there. So one of the things I've heard is that there have been some Filipino fishermen who have vowed to retaliate against China if they do essentially kidnap Filipino fishermen by themselves kidnapping Chinese nationals. Do you think they would actually do that? And do you think that would actually be a deterrent to the CCP?
Well, I don't think that the fishermen will actually do that. I did see the news item where there was one fisherman who was quoted as saying that. But just this morning I was with another group of fishermen, and they got asked the same questions about possibility of being arrested. They did not mention any kind of retaliatory action, but they did say that they will continue to fish anyway. They will not be deterred by such kinds of actions from the Chinese, because after all, what they're doing is they're fighting for their livelihoods. And so that kind of activity against them will not be enough to keep them away from pursuing their livelihoods.
So that's interesting. The Filipino fishermen clearly see that China is the bad guy here, because I know in a lot of situations the CCP will try to manipulate people who are being affected, for example, Filipino fishermen, by saying like, oh, well, if the central government just was more cooperative with China, then you could fish. You shouldn't be mad at us. You should be mad at your government.
Yes, and they've tried that for quite a while now, but even the fishermen know that that situation is not acceptable. Because they used to have the freedom to fish in these areas without any kind of condition, without any kind of interference. And now, years later, what they're seeing really is that they're not being allowed. They're being prevented from fishing. And what is of more concern is that in the past year or so, China has actively been uh, making fishing more risky for them, financially and physically. Financially, I mean, what I mean by that is that China is going out and destroying the fish aggregating devices that they use to try to catch fish beyond the shoal. No? And they were only forced to do that. They were forced to resort to these devices precisely because they're being denied access to Scarborough Shoal, which used to be their main fishing ground. But now China is destroying even those devices. And China has also been actively preventing them from even just taking shelter on the shoal during inclement weather, forcing them to go home even if they haven't caught anything. And they've also been basically intimidating our fishermen by showing their presence, even while the fishermen are just on their way to where they want to fish. So it's really a situation where the fishermen see that it's really China that is the problem. And the government, what they've asked for the government is simply just some support, even just mere presence, really, to give them some sense of safety, at least, or so that they would at least know where to go to in case the Chinese Coast Guard or militia do something against them while they're at sea. So that's really the situation as they see it.
So, I mean, China claims the entire South China Sea, and in particular, they've been very aggressive against the Philippines and the Second Thomas Shoal and the Scarborough Shoal. Uh, what do you think the CCP's? What is the purpose of what they're doing? Like well, like we know they want to claim all of this territory, but do they really think that spraying Filipino fishermen with water cannons? What does that accomplish for China?
What it accomplishes is that it diminishes Filipino presence in that area. Before all of this flared up, really, it was our fishermen and their presence that enable us not only to exploit our resources, but also assert our rights and jurisdictions to these resources under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Their presence, however, is inconsistent with China's perceived security needs. No? What they're doing here is first and foremost for only for military and strategic purposes. It's not because of environment. It's not because of resources. Those are all secondary to China. When it comes to the South China Sea, they simply want to secure it and turn it into a Chinese lake, essentially, over which they have absolute control. And so, smaller countries like us, even though we have legitimate resource interests in the area, they don't care about that, and they will destroy our resources if they think they need to, which is what they did when they started building artificial islands in the Spratly Islands. That shows that they really don't care about resources or environment. Their primary consideration is military and strategic, and that is directed against primarily the United States, no, whom they see as the potential adversary, and they are so insecure about their coastal area, their southern borders. So they believe that they have to really dominate the sea areas around them in order to keep the U.S. away as much as possible from their supposedly vulnerable coasts. And that comes at the cost of also dominating and subordinating all the surrounding nations that happen to be there.
It's a good point you make about the environment because I mean they've been destroying reefs. They've been fishing quote unquote by dumping cyanide into the waters. Like these are obviously not things you would do if like resources were your top priority.
Yes, yes, and really that has been fairly consistent, no, in all of these years. In a way, what happened in 2012 when these tensions really started flaring up between the Philippines and China is that the Philippines found them out, no, on Scarborough Shoal. Their fishermen were destroying the coral reefs to gather up these giant clams, which they use as a substitute for ivory. So it's a multi-billion-dollar industry for them, no? But they were basically extracting or mining these coral habitats, and that activity is essentially, that's diametrically opposed to the interests of the Filipinos who need these corals to be left alone so that they can be fish habitats and generate the fisheries that everyone has been benefiting for decades. When we tried to stop them there, China saw that as an opportunity to take control of the reef. And then later in the years that followed, they just kept expanding this control, moving particularly down south to the Spratly Island regions. And now, after building these artificial islands and creating three of the largest military bases essentially in the South China Sea, they've taken to deploying their maritime militia, hundreds of them, at least 180 to 200 vessels each day. They're occupying essentially the remaining reefs, no? Preventing Filipino fishermen from coming near, and also by their action contributing to the degradation of these reef areas, because you can't have scores of vessels anchoring in one place without doing any damage to these sensitive coral reefs. So they're doing that again just so that they can have this sense of security. And whereas before the militia were sort of keeping a low profile, that changed in 2022 when they again escalated incrementally, and now the militia have been very active now, acting as if they're part of the China Coast Guard in maneuvering against Filipino vessels, whether they're fishing vessels or government vessels. So they're really tightening their hold around the South China Sea through these means.
With China militarizing these artificial islands they've created, do you think their actions are going to escalate? Like, it won't just stay water cannons. They might start to have more serious displays of power.
I do believe so, because we've seen it already on the Vietnamese side. When I did a study on their interactions with the Vietnamese over the years, it reached the point where they were actually injuring Vietnamese people and sinking their vessels. There have been ramming incidents and stuff like that. And a few years ago, we saw that they were unilaterally exploring for oil and protecting those operations with a cordon of Coast Guard and militia vessels, which were ramming Vietnamese ships in order to keep them away. So that hasn't happened yet on the Philippine side of the South China Sea or in the West Philippine Sea, but you could easily surmise that they can do that as well. They've already been steadily escalating in terms of their actions against Philippine vessels, from radio warnings to dangerous maneuvers to near collisions to the use of the lasers, no, and water cannon. The water cannon, they've also been increasingly strong. No, before they would just shoot it at the water near the vessel. Then they turned to actually hitting the vessel without doing damage. But the latest incidents and last month, they were really directing the water cannon at particular parts of the Philippine vessel, like their radars or their communication equipment, really things that you need to safely operate the ship. So you can see that there's really that pattern. And so I really expect that this will continue to increase because, from their perspective, they think that no matter what happens, the Philippines will be the first to blink, to surrender, essentially. They think that the Philippines will not be able to stand up to their pressure. Okay, so that's why I think they're really slowly increasing, ramping up their aggressiveness against us.
You say they think the Philippines will not be able to stand up to their pressure. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think that there is of course that consideration, no? That the Philippines is, no matter what we do, we're the smaller country. Our economy, our armed forces are like, they're like 10 to 15 times larger than us. And if we were left alone to our own devices, if we did not have any friends or allies, essentially, that would probably be true. We would easily succumb to pressure. But I think that's what played out, especially during the previous administration of President Duterte, because he essentially also isolated the Philippines from friends and allies. And because of that, Duterte just kept conceding whatever the Chinese demanded. But now with the current government, it's taken a different track, and it has actually come and decided to rely on friends and allies. And I think that is helping the Philippines really stand up to pressure. With the previous administration, just the single water cannon incident was enough to discourage them. And because of that, they later, about a year later, they were quickly dissuaded from continuing its plans to conduct oil exploration, for example, on Reed Bank. No? And the previous government was simply, intimidated by China. Now, with the current government, we've seen that I think it didn't work as easily as before, forcing China to ramp up its pressure. So the test really will be when we have another activity such as the resumption of oil exploration in the West Philippine Sea. That's when we will see the mettle of the current administration, and the prospects of standing up to even more pressure from China.
Can you talk a little bit about what the Filipino Coast Guard has done in response to these escalated attacks, things like water cannon from the Chinese side? Just there's been some interesting things that they've done in terms of just even exposing what the Chinese Coast Guard is doing.
Mhm. Yes. Well, it started from zero under the previous administration, where they were not even able to conduct fairly regular patrols in the exclusive economic zone in the West Philippine Sea. And they basically were hiding the aggressive interactions from the China Coast Guard. No? They were essentially acceding to China's demands to keep everything quiet. But that changed under the current administration. They decided to be more active now in sailing in the West Philippine Sea, and in assisting our fishermen conduct their activities. That led to them being confronted with dangerous maneuvers, especially in those two areas of Scarborough Shoal and Second Thomas Shoal. The Coast Guard has been much more visible to our fishermen, and they have been much more active in providing support for them. And despite the dangerous maneuvers, the Coast Guard basically has done its best to avoid the collisions that are being set up by the China Coast Guard, and they've been largely successful, I think. But that's probably why, with the incremental escalation in the past year, you now had the Chinese resorting to slightly different tactics. This time they really come very close, and there have been a couple of occasions where the ships have actually made contact. No, not yet a very serious collision, but they basically made contacts with minor damage. And the Coast Guard did not allow itself to be deterred by that. No? So they continued on, still doing what they were doing essentially. The Coast Guard did not escalate the situation. They still conducted their activities in the same way that they did before, meaning two vessels escorting two other vessels. We've never increased the number of vessels significantly in this area, while the Chinese kept on adding to the ships that they were using. No? First, it was more Coast Guard vessels, then they added the militia vessels, and then they kept piling on more militia vessels, such that I think in the last incidents, we still had four Filipino vessels, two of them Coast Guard, faced with something like 40 Chinese ships. So we keep on trying. They keep on carrying on. They just carry on. And even if they are being now hit by this water cannon, the policy is to not retaliate with our own water cannon, because, well, as they said, no, our water cannons are made for fighting fires, not making others, not being used against other ships. So that's the current policy, really. Just keep on doing what we're doing, and if China happens to be there and carries out these activities, continue to record and continue to reveal to the world what's happening.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that I think the most recent minor collision, there were foreign journalists on board the Philippine Coast Guard vessels. So when the Chinese Communist Party like put their propaganda mechanism into play and tried to start claiming that it was like the Filipino vessel that rammed the Chinese vessel, then you had journalists from the BBC or CNN or places where they were like, well, I was actually there and I saw it. And then they have like an eyewitness account that will contradict the CCP's message.
Yes, yes. That's because out of the experience, basically they learn from the experience of cooperating with Chinese demands to keep things quiet. And they basically realized that, by doing that, they allow China the opportunity to shape the narrative, to change the story essentially. So that's why with the transparency initiative, as they called it, the policy now is to have as much coverage, shall we say, as possible as to what's going on, whether it's video, audio, on the vessel or around it. No? And also journalists, they've allowed journalists to join these missions so that there would be a third party, essentially, that can do also the recording. So it wouldn't be just the Coast Guard versus the Chinese Coast Guard's account, but there would be independent accounts. And that has been quite effective, as you mentioned. No? Some of the Chinese attempts at twisting the story lately have been a bit laughable, actually, and even backfired against them because at one point they accused the foreign journalists, all these journalists, of manipulating the videos and contriving these stories, no. And that was met with an immediate response from all of the journalists in the Philippines, even the ones that were before very some said were even more sympathetic to China, but they all pushed back against that.
So as China becomes increasingly violent, how should the Philippines fight back? Is just exposing what they're doing enough?
Well, the exposure of what they're doing essentially, I think, is what's being leveraged to gain more support, both moral and material support from other countries, which is again another thing that China does not want. China wants the smaller Southeast Asian claimants to stand alone and to deal with them bilaterally on their own without any kind of external support, assistance in whatever form. That way, they will be able to dominate any kind of negotiated settlement. But the Philippines, by doing this, has actually been attracting not only international attention, but also we've seen many countries come to the Philippines over the past year or so. Almost like every month, there's somebody new coming to hold talks, offer assistance on the maritime arena, as well as strike up new deals economically. No, because that's another aspect of it. It's also trying to increase the resilience of the Philippines against Chinese pressure on that front, on the economic front. So I think in that way, it's been effective in creating that, using it as leverage, no, to strengthen the Philippines' hand, no, by the support, through the support of other countries.
Can you talk? What countries are coming to the Philippines for this?
Well, aside from the United States, which has long been the partner, we've had much more closer coordination and assistance from East Asian countries like Japan and Korea. We've had Australia become very, very active, actually. Even India last month and past 2 months, they've sent ships here as well as their foreign ministers, and they've expressed support for the Philippine position on the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea. We've had countries from Europe, Germany, France, they've been much more visible. France was even an observer in the latest alliance exercises. The UK as well has also been much more active than before. So they're really quite a lot. And even countries that never used to be visible, like the Czech Republic, now they've been seen, no, coming to the Philippines to discuss possible cooperation about the maritime sphere, as well as increasing economic linkages.
That's interesting because you said this was ultimately about China and the US. and that China was wanting to get the Philippines more isolated from all of its allies, and yet it's having the opposite effect, where it seems like the Philippines is getting more allies.
Yes, yes. Actually, that's why we are saying we, in a way, we also have to thank Xi Jinping because he's the reason why these things are happening. It's backfiring on them, and even I think we see it even in the way that their propaganda has been coming out increasingly shrill and sometimes ridiculous. That's a sign, I think, that the Philippine posture right now in the policy is become very effective.
I would also say that the Philippines has come up with a very clever strategy militarily, which is that they see that China is strong when it comes to its Navy and its Coast Guard. So the Philippines is not fighting back on their ground. The Philippines is fighting back by using its own strength against China's weakness, which is the exposure of the truth, right? Using video and drone footage and inviting journalists on and building alliances based on trust. Those are all the CCP's weaknesses. So I would just point out that it's a very clever, essentially military strategy without actually being military.
Well, yes, that's true. Our military has also, in a way, adjusted and adapted. They know that they cannot confront China one on one. Okay, and so military has actually been keeping, shall we say, a low profile when it comes to interactions with China. They're in the background and they're present and they're aware, and they also conduct their own activities. But you see that they're not in the news as much as, say, the Coast Guard. But in the meantime, the alliance relationship has really strengthened in the past year or so. We had the bilateral defense guidelines being agreed to last year. And a month ago, we had the largest Balikatan exercises between the Philippines and the US. And that was joined by observer countries. So, and the Philippine military has also been shifting as well its posture now. Before we were only concerned with internal security operations against communist rebels and Muslim secessionists. Those issues are now almost resolved. So the military is now reorienting itself towards external defense, and it's really trying to find ways to accomplish that. No? And that's again something that um, China probably doesn't want to happen. Okay, because again, they see us merely as areas to dominate for their own defense. So they wouldn't like it if the Philippines were to strengthen its own defense apparatus.
Well, speaking of that, I know the Philippines has recently announced it's going to build its own South China Sea base on, I might be mispronouncing this, but Pag-asa Island. I mean, that's further from the Philippine mainland. It's closer to the Spratly Islands, where China has its own base. What do you think? Like, what's the strategy of this from the Filipino side, and how do you think China will react to that?
Well, I've been on that island 3 times now. The last one was just 2 months ago. Yes, it's technically a base. It's what probably the military would call one of their forward operating bases, but it's still rather small. After all, the size of the island itself is pretty small. You can walk around it in 30 minutes, really. And the biggest structure there is the runway, which is larger than the island. Uh, the improvements there in the past couple of years have really been meant to ensure that the facilities, the base, as well as the community um, is able to withstand lengthier periods of, say, like inclement weather when supplies will be running low. It's really to increase the resilience essentially of the facilities and the communities there, and that helps to ensure that our presence there is really maintained. I don't think it really will add to the strategic or military equation, shall we say, because the runway cannot accommodate a combat aircraft. It's really just for cargo aircraft for now, and maybe helicopters if they're available. But these improvements they will not change the military balance, shall we say, in that area. So it's really just to ensure that the continuity of Philippine presence there on that island.
What about the Sierra Madre ship that's in the Second Thomas Shoal, which is, for the people watching who don't know, it's like this old World War II ship that has been essentially grounded on a shoal and is a kind of permanent base for the Philippines, but it's all there is this rusty old ship. What do you think is the future of that in terms of what the Philippines is going to do with it and how the Chinese military is going to react?
Mhm. Well, that one for me is the more critical point, no? In this in all of these outposts that we have. Um, it is clear that the Philippines needs to maintain its presence on Second Thomas Shoal. One, it deters another Chinese incursion. After all, the ship was grounded there precisely for that purpose. After they built well, after they took over Mischief Reef about 25 nautical miles away, and that reef, Second Thomas Shoal, is between Mischief Reef, now the largest military base in the Spratlys, and Palawan. Okay. So it has that function of being able to monitor activities in the area as it was originally intended. And now it has acquired even greater significance symbolically because the way things have played out, the Sierra Madre, despite its decrepit nature, is the symbol of the Philippines' exercise of its jurisdiction in the West Philippine Sea, in our EEZ and our continental shelf. It is what indicates that we have sovereign rights over this area, and that's why China is really putting pressure on it to be removed. Not only so that the monitoring can be, will create another blind spot, but also because of that symbolic value. They want to do that to undermine Philippine jurisdiction, Philippine entitlements in the West Philippine Sea, Philippine jurisdiction over its EEZ, and it also would happen to also undermine the South China Sea Arbitration Award, which validated essentially Philippine jurisdiction over Second Thomas Shoal. So, because of that symbolic significance to both sides, no, it's actually, it could actually be a what you call it, a hotter flashpoint, a more dangerous or more critical flashpoint than other places in the Spratlys for us.
Well, China certainly has been trying to interfere with resupply missions to the Sierra Madre, so it's clear they do consider that very important.
Yes, yes, and they've really been essentially tightening the noose around it. But the Philippines has expressed its intention to not allow itself to be deterred. We really need to try to keep our position there, not only for as long as possible, but permanently. And that's the other, potential crisis point. No? At some time in the future, as you said, no, the vessel might simply collapse. No? It's been there far longer than any other vessel that I know of in the open sea, exposed to the open sea. And at some time we will have to make a decision, I think, on what to do to ensure that our position there is maintained.
If China continues to interfere with the resupply missions there, well, why can't the U.S. just airdrop supplies? Why hasn't the U.S. gotten involved in that?
Um, the Philippines has been using airdrops, although from our perspective it's a little bit riskier because it's possible that the drop might miss, and or that now Chinese units might actually be able to interfere with that kind of an operation. So that's why, and besides airdrops, necessarily that will be a lower volume, lower amount of cargo and supplies that you can bring when you do that. We have not called on the U.S. to assist with that because there's also that. I guess there's that sense of, number one is pride. This is our claim as well. It is our jurisdiction. It is our rights, no, and we want to do it on our own as much as possible. The other factor, I think, is that there are also concerns that having the United States so visibly involved might create a reaction on China's part. They've made it clear, for example, that they do not want any third party involvement in any kind of operation in that area. And at this point, I don't think anybody really knows what that would mean if there were actual third party participation, like if the United States, for example, very visibly or actually delivered supplies to that area. They already reacted rather badly to the mere presence of U.S. surveillance aircraft before during the supplies. They were already complaining about that. So I don't know how they would react if it were a U.S. vessel that is actually bringing the supplies to the Sierra Madre. But again, these are things that have to be considered at that critical point in the future when we have to make a serious decision on what to do with Sierra Madre.
It seems that the CCP has recently tried to claim that there was some kind of gentleman's agreement between the Philippines and the China over resupply missions to the Sierra Madre, like how many ships could go, and like they agreed to let a certain number, and they accuse the Philippines of violating that, and that's why they're attacking these resupply ships now. What do you think of that?
Uh, this is, I think, another way by which they've been trying to change the narrative and revise history. What they're banking on, from what I can tell, is they're trying to make it appear that there was an agreement, that the Philippines would only send one ship with only supplies for humanitarian reasons to the troops there, but we would not bring anything else that would, for example, contribute to the repair and maintenance of the ship. Um, I think they're trying to make use of a statement that was made during the Aquino administration back in 2013 when they first blocked a resupply mission, where I think either the foreign minister or the defense minister publicly said that basically in explaining or in telling China not to interfere, no, they gave an assurance that the vessels they were sending there were only bringing supplies for the troops. And in that context, they were trying to bring tensions down. No? And this is 2014. So they use that. I think what they're doing is that they use that to say that there's actually some kind of an agreement. Okay? Uh, but lately, they've also been, again, changing the story. No? They said it was, at some point, they said it was a gentleman's agreement. Okay, which in the first place, if it's a gentleman's agreement, then necessarily it's a non-binding agreement. No? So why are you trying to force us to follow a gentleman's agreement? Then they said that it was during the Duterte administration. Okay, but Duterte then came out saying that there was some kind of agreement. But then when he was talking about it, he could not even he said that actually he did not even know about the Sierra Madre and the Second Thomas Shoal at the time of this supposed agreement. So how could he make an agreement? So later they changed the story again. This time it's not with Duterte but with a special envoy sent by Duterte. Okay, and they said that there is an agreement on a new model for handling the situation. But again, there's no record of this. No? Still, it's another gentleman's agreement. No, and then they changed the description into a temporary special arrangement, which again raises the question: if it's temporary, why are you trying to make it permanent? Okay, so that didn't stick again. Okay, so they changed the story again. Lately, it was now there was an agreement with the admiral, with an admiral who was in charge of the Western Command, and supposedly this was approved by the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of the National Security Advisor. And they even tried to come up with a supposed transcript of a recording. No? So again, it changed the story. The parties changed again, but there's still no real record. Now they try to present some kind of record, but when you think about it, if there is such a record in the first place, it's a crime to make that record because it's wiretapping and still illegal here in the Philippines. Or if it's not true, then you're fabricating a deep fake audio, which is again illegal. So it's really gotten so ridiculous. No? The stories have been changing, parties have been changing, and always There's no proof. There's nothing on record anywhere which would show that there was ever any kind of an agreement. So I think it's all just again, you know, all just part of the psychological warfare, the cognitive warfare. They're trying to shape the narrative so that the Philippines and the government will not have any confidence in its positions, so that they would then concede to them.
Well, I mean, the Chinese Communist Party takes agreements very seriously. I mean, like when they were signatories to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, that's very serious.
Oh, and
The
when Xi
Hague
Jinping
ruling.
promised Obama almost a decade ago that he would not militarize the South China Sea.
Yeah, that was a serious gentleman's agreement. So, I can see why the CCP takes this so seriously.
Yeah.
How can you tell when a communist is lying? When they're talking.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They keep trying to make us comply with supposed unwritten, non-binding, non-formal agreements, while they don't hold up to their own written and publicly announced commitments. So, like that commitment not to militarize the islands. A year later, it's militarized. Back in 1999, when they took Mischief Reef, Wang Yi, who's now their foreign minister, and I was present at that meeting, he said that these facilities were supposedly only for fishermen, and that they would be for civilian purposes only, and that they would even be open for joint use with the Philippines. Now it's a full-blown military base. So where's the commitment there? No? And then you had all these other instances like the Declaration of Conduct, especially, which they totally and completely violated when they built these artificial islands. That's the record.
Well, I think this is one of the reasons it's so good, the strategy the Philippines has taken to just expose these things, because so many countries around the world think, oh, we can still work with China, we can make agreements with them. But if you look at what they do, you can tell agreements with China mean nothing.
Yes.
I mean, no, they do mean something. They mean that you have to follow the agreement, but they are free to not follow the agreement. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. And that's why it's really, I've been on this issue for what, more than 25 years now, and I've seen how the story evolved. So I'm so jaded. I'm so jaded now about anything that they say or do. So the only way to really understand what's going on and understand intentions and plans is to just look at what they're doing, not what they're saying. And it's clear to me that what they're doing is really to try to ease the Philippines out of its own waters and really dominate the area.
I think it just reveals the paranoia of the communist mindset. Like you mentioned, like this is their fear is that U.S. Filipino relations will be a threat to China's southern border. Like this is just this kind of delusional paranoia of like, oh, if we allow this to happen, we're vulnerable because obviously everyone wants to fight and kill each other. So
well, I
we
mean, I
have
think
to-
it's because they often accuse other people of doing things that they're doing. So, in their mind, like often, when they say things like, "Oh, these protests in Hong Kong are supported by the U.S.," they're secret, the CIA secret, but they also support, efforts to undermine other countries in their own. So they're seeing they see monsters everywhere because they do these monstrous things themselves.
yeah.
Right. Which actually brings me to another thing I wanted to ask you about, which is outside of the incidents in the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea, what kind of political subversion is the CCP involved in when it comes to what's happening in the Philippines?
Yes, that one has now become a more visible concern. Right now, I mean, in the past couple of days, we've seen this political drama, or is it a political comedy, playing out where a mayor, one of our mayors here, is being investigated by the Senate for links to the offshore gambling operations of China. So basically, they're looking at it as a money laundering front, as well as a base, because these Philippine gambling operations, they're online, so there's a lot of IT involved. they're seeing it as not only a money laundering operation, but also a possible base for conducting hacking operations. And we've had quite a number of attacks lately. Databases have been compromised, like the healthcare database. We've had reports of certain agencies' computer systems being hacked. So they were investigating this, no? And it's turning out that this person, in the course of the Senate investigations, it's turning out that she has no records of. There's a record of birth, but
This is Alice Guo you're talking about.
yes, Alice Go. The named parents don't have any records. Her birth certificate was registered 17 years after her supposed birth date, and she's been very evasive in providing details about her life, like where she went to school, where she lived, what was her young life like, things like that. So it's really increased the suspicions on the part of many people here that that's what's happening. There's also political interference and subversion going on in the even in the local governments. No? So yeah, it's a real concern that aside from what's going on in the South China Sea, there are also actions now being undertaken in Philippine soil to weaken Philippine resolve, no, to essentially subvert the government, no, and keep it from being more active, being more actively defending our rights and entitlements. No?
Yeah, I remember in her case, it came out that like she somehow had owned a helicopter, and like the land that this offshore gambling facility was built on. But she sold it.
She claimed that she sold it before it was an offshore gambling operation.
Yeah.
So everything's fine. Yeah.
Because it's so weird.
A simple person, but then admits that she has a helicopter and 12 vehicles, including a supercar and the latest SUVs.
When do I get my helicopter? Well, so we should bring this up because now you've used it and you used it, Matt. The term the West Philippine Sea. This is something that's being used a lot more instead of just the South China Sea. Can you just tell us what the difference is? Why this is a term being used?
Well, this springs from the Aquino administration. The West Philippine Sea is simply a shorthand term to refer to the waters under Philippine jurisdiction in the South China Sea. So, the South China Sea is the large geographic area. It's just an appellation. It's just a name. It doesn't attribute sovereignty or ownership to anyone, not China. So it's there, but parts of the South China Sea are under the jurisdiction of the surrounding countries because their EEZs and continental shelves are there. So the West Philippine Sea is essentially the portion of the South China Sea over which we have that jurisdiction. It's our EEZ and continental shelf in that area, as well as the waters around the islands, which happen to be outside the EEZ and continental shelf.
So EEZ is your exclusive economic zone. Is that 200 nautical miles?
200.
Offshore?
I mean, this is another interesting example of propaganda warfare. Is not the narrative warfare, maybe, is what I'm talking about, where this is a very important aspect of fighting the Chinese Communist Party, because they want you, obviously, to focus on the military aspect, of which China is a big country and you can't really fight that. But that there are all these other vectors that you can attack.
Yes, that one particularly, that was a response to the Chinese claims back in 2013, no, when the tensions flared. No, the argument that they made was simply that, look, it's called South China Sea and therefore it belongs to China. Okay, and the world accepts
according to
it.
The Hague.
That was the line of argument. So naturally, the Philippine government had to respond to that, and basically the response is, okay, no, it's the West Philippine Sea. We're claiming the West Philippine Sea.
Are other countries along the South China Sea doing that? Like, is Vietnam calling it the West
East Vietnamese Sea?
East Vietnamese Sea?
Yes, they have similar hopes for Vietnam and North Natuna Sea for Indonesia.
Like, I mean, it's absurd that China can just use the name to claim. It'd be like saying that, because it's called Chinatown, it belongs to China.
Don't give them ideas.
We have to call it like Dim Sum Town.
Matt, that was terrible. Okay. I forgot what I was going to ask completely.
We were talking about narrative warfare.
We can't go off the rails when we have a guest
No.
here.
Well, this is maybe a little different topic, but there were headlines this week about the Philippine Coast Guard is opening an outpost in the north of the country that's, the headlines say it's close to Taiwan. Would you say that's accurate? And like, what is the thinking behind that?
Well, most of the Philippines is close to Taiwan in any case.
Yeah, that's true too.
Actually, this is in Batanes. These are the northernmost islands. I've been there as well. It's a very nice place if you want to visit. You can actually get Taiwanese radio stations when you're there, no, on your radio. But this is part of, again, that reorientation of the Philippines from internal security to external defense. No? Actually, this is already the second major move there. The first one was the establishment of a military outpost on Mavulis Island, which is the one that is really the northern tip of the Batanes Islands. So this is all part of that reorientation. It's trying to increase presence as well as the ability to monitor that area. And the straits between Taiwan and the Philippines happen to be very important. No? They're vital not only for the Philippines and Taiwan, but also for the rest of the world. So I think this is just a natural effect, no, a logical step, no, for the Philippine government if it's serious about beefing up its external defense and really focusing now on defending the country. They have to strengthen these various outposts. No? And there, near Taiwan, happens to be one of the most important ones because of of obvious reasons. No, if China were to engage in any hostile action against Taiwan, the Philippines will be the first to be affected, no, because of our proximity in many ways.
And you've been talking about sort of these new alliances that are coming out in response to Chinese aggression. Tell us a little bit about the Squad alliance and what that's doing to counter China.
Yeah, I think it's a result of many discussions going on at the same time and then converging. So now you had the Japan, Philippines, Australia, and what is the fourth one? Not India.
United States.
Sorry, yeah, U.S. That.
I think that's a pretty big one.
Sorry, it is late in the night. But yeah.
So it's like the Quad, but the Philippines instead of India.
Yeah, so because they had all these discussions individually, I think the opportunity arose that last meeting when they were all present, they happened to be there. And, even though during those individual discussions, bilateral discussions between the Philippines and these other countries, there had always been that idea of somehow coordinating, or at least making sure that these efforts reinforce each other and that do not get into each other's way. So I think it's just logical that when they had that opportunity, they saw that opportunity to look at it more as a squad, between the four countries. And I think that's perfect for me. I think because I have been participating in several discussions, policy discussions, including some of the bilaterals with these countries, and always the point was made that we need to coordinate our efforts better. If the Philippines is the central node, the common partner of all of these other countries, then even just for our own interests, we need to make sure that these partnerships and alliances actually help each other, create a synergy instead of being managed separately as if they're not connected with the other, or worse, have them at cross purposes.
So where do you see the Philippine strategy regarding China and South China Sea area moving forward?
Assuming that this continues, I think that the strategy is to really strengthen and become much more close, much more integrated and coordinated with external countries. And that's really the way to go because, as I mentioned earlier, the Philippines is a small country compared to China. And so our only hope of matching that is through friends and allies and having that kind of coordinated effort. So I think that's where all of this is heading. It's also exactly what China does not want. So I hope that this is sustained even beyond this administration. That's always been our problem, the changes in administration. But before, that was easy because the people were essentially detached from foreign issues, foreign affairs issues. Now, because of the increased awareness, I think there's now the possibility that these foreign affairs issues will become more stable, no? And the people and their support for a position that stands up for Philippine rights and entitlements, no? That will hopefully be more sustained now, even across succeeding administrations.
Now, I understand that you like war games and also board games,
Yes. Yes.
right? What are the best board games for people to play to understand what could go terribly, terribly wrong in a war with China?
Oh, there's Flashpoint South China Sea, which gives you an idea of the political maneuvering, the influencing maneuvers for influence, gives you an idea of the political aspect. When it comes to the military aspect, there's from a wider scale. There are what is this? There's a Compass Games South China Sea board game. I think that seems to be the more accessible one from a much wider regional perspective. And then for a more focused one, tactical level, I would say Littoral Commander, Indo-Pacific. So you have those three different levels to give you a flavor of all the various aspects. I'm using this as a teaching method with my class, and we play the game on what's been going on in the South China Sea. And the students appreciated it and liked it because I was able to use it to explain what the different countries are doing in that region. So,
Did you have any students win the war game in a interesting way?
um, well, they ended up in a stalemate, at least. At least a total loss, but stalemate. Um, when I did it in my previous class, I used a different game. That one was actually a little bit more interesting because it set up China, the U.S., and ASEAN against each other. And the surprise to me was that the ASEAN countries won in that
Oh,
particular conflict. Oh,
Interesting.
what a surprise! Uh, yeah, but this one
well, there's no need to.
it was a different game. So it's just Philippines and China. So we were well. If you're an optimist, you could say that the Philippines was able to hold its own and withstand the pressure. I guess.
Yeah. Well, the ASEAN countries have the most to fight for because they have the most to lose.
Yes. Yes.
Although that's why the CCP spent many years undermining ASEAN, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and unfortunately, among all the ASEAN countries right now, the Philippines really is the front line, and it's in a way it's unique. Its position and interests are quite unique. The continental ASEAN members like Laos, Cambodia, they're linked directly to China. Their interests are more land-based, like Mekong River, perhaps. No, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, they have the luxury of distance, as I always tell people. No, they're much farther away, and between them and China is the Philippines. And the Philippines, on the other hand, its interests in resources of the sea, particularly, are much more pronounced than any of these other countries. So now we're really bearing the brunt of China's expansion. And we're also right in the middle of the first island chain and second island chain. So we're in a much more critical position geographically. So I always say that the real fulcrum in the South China Sea, in Southeast Asia, is actually the Philippines. Whatever happens to the Philippines will determine what happens to the rest of the region.
But you've also got a mutual defense treaty with the U.S. too.
Yes, which for decades essentially was not taken advantage of, and relations between the two countries simply did not give it as much importance. No? Possibly because during the time there was no real credible external threat to the Philippines. The threat was really internal, the insurgency, and that was the thought, that was the thinking for both countries for many decades. Now that has changed, and there is an actual, possible, and credible existential threat to the Philippines. So the alliance now has to again adapt and respond.
Mhm. And I do want to point out it is a mutual defense treaty. So when Canada inevitably tries to invade the U.S., I expect Filipino forces to help defend the United States.
We can bring the Filipino Coast Guard to Newfoundland.
Yeah. There we go.
We might have to, but we might have to neutrality over that because we have more Filipino migrants in Canada.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow. Interesting. This is the real fracture line on mutual
It's always
defense
Canada.
treaty.
It's always Canada. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. For anyone watching who wants to learn more about you and your work, where should they go? Where should they follow you?
Oh, well, on YouTube, they Google my name. They can see the stuff I get involved in. I have a Facebook page and a Twitter account, of course. Just search that. But my institute, the Institute for Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea, at the University of the Philippines, we also have a Facebook page. So this year we're going to try to be much more active there. So because of all these things that are happening, and actually tomorrow I'll be talking with somebody to give us some help on things like audiovisual productions and production of materials for people. So I think that would be the first. Those would be the what you call this, the permanent places or web pages. Otherwise, just Google my name.
Great. Well, I hope if ever we're in the Philippines again, we can meet up and play a game of Flashpoint, South China Sea.
Certainly, because it doesn't get played often enough at home.
Yeah.
The usual problem with war game enthusiasts, at home they don't have anybody to play with.
Yeah, I can't get these guys to play with me. Actually, we should play it on the gaming channel. We could do it live of us playing it. I like it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again for joining us.
Welcome, and I'm very happy that you got me on the show. Thank you.
All right. Final thoughts?
I can't believe there are like at least 3 board games about the South China Sea.
I know. I can't even get you guys to play Betrayal at House on the Haunting. I can never remember the name.
The Betrayal at House on the Hill.
That's it.
like
Betrayal at House on the Hill. I love that board game, and I can't get you guys.
Well, the
to
problem
play
is
with me.
that Matt and I had separately played it with another friend, and I thought it was fine, but Matt had a really terrible time and has now sworn off that game forever.
Just
So-
give it another chance. Let's do it for a podcast or for the gaming channel. Leave comments below that you want to see us play.
But like
Well-
that, what does that have to do with China, though?
We can. I mean, what? Betrayal, monsters.
The artificially built up hill with a military base on it.
That's
well,
right.
you do build the board
Yeah.
as you go. I think it is a little bit of a challenge to play for the first time because none of us had played it. Oh no, one person had played it in the group, but like 3 out of 4 people had not played it.
As long as one person knows, it's pretty straight.
But,
We'll
like-
do it on the gaming channel.
Yeah, the
otherwise.
problem is that you then have to learn how to do it. Like, remember when we tried to play that?
Monopoly Socialism.
No, that was
That one went
fun.
well, and
But
I knew
no,
what
no,
I was
no.
doing.
Separately, there was that Christmas when we all played
Oh, some
off
other
camera. It was like
Arkham Asylum.
Yes, it was like some
Lovecraft.
I was gonna say Lockheed. I'm like, what am I saying?
It's a Lockheed Martin game.
I was thinking about defense contractors.
Yeah,
And
it was great.
Terror and like Cthulhu. But yeah, it took a long time for us to.
Well, we never played because none of us could figure it out.
Well, we did play, but then kind of like got stuck 3/4 of the way through because like you kept having to go back and read the directions.
That's why I know how to play Betrayal. I've played it many times. Let's do it. Let's just do it. Yes, there are lots of board games about the South China Sea because it is important and you should know about it.
Now I'm thinking about board games and how I gave you a 3 Kingdoms board game. Also, I think for Christmas one year that we never played. It
I
was-
don't remember this. I don't think I have it.
I think Matt has it.
Oh, maybe I have it on a shelf somewhere. Well, sorry, Chris. That was your
Why do you
gift
have
from
my
your-
gift, Matt?
I have no idea.
I think it was because
Remember when we were recording all the shows in my living room?
yeah, and we were gonna play it on the show, and then I don't think Matt ever
I probably also didn't have room in the cardboard box I lived in.
the cardboard box. Yes.
Yeah.
But
All
now in your bigger, like, 2 cardboard
box.
boxes.
I know. I am an elite cardboard box landowner. New York City, I like to lord my cardboard boxes over all the poor people.
With just one.
It's just one or half of a cardboard box.
All right. Well,
Any thoughts about the Philippines?
I mean, I think the podcast itself was pretty good. Lots of good information there.
Yeah, I mean, I am very impressed with their narrative warfare strategies, actually.
Yeah, it was actually reminding me a lot of Sergej Popovich, the old what was that country? I can't think. My brain is shutting off.
Was it Serbia?
Serbia, that's right.
he's not that old. You just mean that this happened in like the 90s.
Yeah, and like he wrote a great book called Blueprint for Revolution, and it's basically the idea of like despite Americans having this history of the American Revolution and growing up watching Star Wars, the idea of like this plucky band of rebels fighting against this totalitarian empire, it's stupid.
Does he say that in the book?
He doesn't say. I'm paraphrasing.
Okay.
But when you are up against a highly militarized force, you don't try and fight their highly militarized force if you're just a plucky band of rebels.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Right.
Yes.
He means you don't fight them militarily.
Militarily.
You have to fight them on other grounds.
You fight them
weak.
where they are weak. Yeah.
Right.
You don't fight them where they're strong because that's stupid.
Yeah.
Star Wars is stupid.
And look what happened to all the subsequent Star Wars movies.
Yeah,
That's just an example.
Actually,
one,
but
two.
then aren't you saying only the only good ones were about the plucky band of rebels fighting the Empire?
No,
like
but
the other ones
but the
got
point is that
terrible?
everything fell apart, right? So if you look at episode, oh God, what are the numbers now? Episode 7, right? And it's like, well, it kind of didn't work, right? The whole rebellion.
Well, because as
failed.
Sergej writes in his book, like one of the biggest challenges to any revolution is like after
The
you beat
governance,
the government.
right?
Yeah, once that other government is overthrown, how do you establish a new government when you suddenly have like all these different factions who maybe don't actually like each other very much?
Yes, and then you have to actually sit down and compromise and like build something.
And it's not
instead
fun,
of-
or as he says, sexy.
Yes, it is not as fun as, protesting against the man. Yeah.
Which actually is like the fundamental problem with the sequel Star Wars trilogies, is because like that, like the actual building of a government, people don't want to watch that in a movie, so it just goes, what do we do? Let's just reset everything and have it be the same story, only worse.
And they sold a lot of tickets.
Well, at
Yes,
least
and
initially.
Yeah.
well, this is why Babylon 5 is the best sci-fi property. It's like it understands that like the nitty-gritty political, compromising, like that's what is exciting. They lean into it. It's space UN. It's great.
Isn't one of the prequel Star Wars also about?
He
Political
tried to be,
maneuvering?
but
Okay.
then it like was still
I've
like
never
stupid
watched-
space wizards waving their laser swords.
I've never
around.
watched any of the prequels actually. So
Oh, okay. Misa, feel bad for you.
I do know that reference though.
Good. Yes, the point is Babylon 5 and maybe Deep Space Nine.
You like the space station sci-fi. You don't like the going
The
out
political
into the world,
entry, like
explore-
all this, let's fly in space, pew, 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 pew.
exploring new worlds.
Lame. Why explore a new world when we can talk about politics in our current society?
This explains a lot about your current profession and also our recent low views.
Oh, please watch us.
Okay, I think we better wrap up.
Okay, bye-bye.